Thanks for joining today for another fun episode. So I noticed a lot of stuff going around on social media talking about different things involved with this new stimulus bill, especially a lot of controversy around things such as how much foreign aid is included. I found it really difficult to fact check and really understand what's going into this and what isn't. So out of my own curiosity and need to know, I scanned through the official summary documents, which were only something around 30, 40 pages. And I will include those links in the description. In addition to the almost 5,600 pages of the actual bill that clearly I did not go over, and possibly nobody else did either. Because I've invested hours of my own time trying to put together the most comprehensive line item summary, I wanted to share with others in case it was useful and maybe save you some time as well. I also try to make it much more interesting and meaningful by sharing the numbers at a per taxpayer level, as we can easily get lost in the large numbers, but maybe we'll appreciate seeing an estimate of what the average taxpayer is donating to each of these items. The first thing that I found is that part of this is the stimulus bill, about $900 billion, and that was combined with a more general operations type bill called the Omnibus spending bill for $1.4 trillion. That gives the total of the $2.3 trillion, or roughly $16,050 per taxpayer. Basically, these 5,593 pages include all of the little things that people thought they could reasonably package together without pushing too far to become the centerpiece of the bill. How many people are going to want to be seen as the one who voted against and stopped the COVID relief bill? Not many. And so when you combine that with the fact that most people did not have time to read this, and in fact, several representatives commented on having to vote so quickly on a bill before even having the final text available, they were given a very, very short time frame. So the point is that it wasn't feasible to know all of the content before it was moved forward. But because it appears now that the bill has passed without any alterations, and with a the separate bonus stimulus still being discussed and being voted on now, I wanted to share this out as I was able to compile, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. Just a couple quick comments before I pull up the numbers. I used the latest taxpayer count that I could find, which was from 2017, and this tends to change very little over time, so this should still reflect about the right amount per taxpayer, but obviously that could change depending on the exact count for this year. The totals were either listed directly in the bill or summaries, or made available through other sources, as sometimes the bill would state a policy without necessarily giving the estimated total for that policy. So if you want to think of, for example, a policy that an additional $300 weekly will be given per user of unemployment, we don't know an exact count of what unemployment will be during that time frame, and so any total for that is just given as an estimate. But again, I had to find this elsewhere because some things like that were not included in the bill. So I did the best that I could to keep everything separated, but some of the numbers might roll up into others. Again, this was not clear-cut, was not well organized from any documentation that I found, but we did the best that we could. So without further ado, here is the list. Please enjoy. So as I said, the taxpayer count of 143,300,000 came from the latest numbers that I could find. That may be a little bit different, but again, the per taxpayer column should be about what you would expect, and it should still be true. So for the total, the grand total of this bill that we're looking at, we're talking about $16,050 per taxpayer, or $2.3 trillion total. For the stimulus portion of the package, the $900 billion, that equates to about $6,300 per taxpayer, and that's entirely for the pandemic relief spending. For the Omnibus operating package, that includes a lot more. It's primarily normal bills that nobody would pay attention to most of the time, but does have a lot of increased budgets from the prior year. And that one is the $1.4 trillion, or roughly $9,769 per taxpayer. The Omnibus operating package, some big ones to call out is the defense spending, which was an increase of $5 billion over last year. So that's putting us at $671 billion. The non-defense spending was a much bigger increase of $20 billion over last year. There's some other things, overseas contingency operation. That's the wartime budget. So I think that's defense spending that is basically above and beyond what you would normally expect during peacetime. There's emergency operations for COVID, wildfire suppression, program integrity initiatives, as well as medical research that are all included in that bill. Some other important notes. There was an annual increase to the Department of Health and Human Services of $2.6 billion, again, mostly COVID related. The annual increase to the Treasury Department was also fairly significant this year, as well as to IRS. The VA benefits backlog. The VA is actually a pretty big part of all of this. So the VA benefits backlog was $3.2 billion. The Electric Health Record Program, which I guess is just a technology upgrade that they've been working on in the VA, is $2.6 billion. And then, again, very important is in advance. That's going to the VA for medical programs in 2022 at $94 billion, or almost $656 per taxpayer. Again, I think those per taxpayer notes are really helpful to really think about where is your money going. Some of the ones that also got brought up were in that package was the plans for the Smithsonian. So that included a new museum for the National Museum of the American Latino at $600 million, and the American Women's History Museum at $375 million. Foreign aid, this is where all of this came up and has been blowing up on social media. This was just part of the normal omnibus spending that happens essentially every year, but most of the time people don't really pay attention to it. This time we did because it was packaged up with a COVID relief bill. In that foreign aid, we had $500 million going to Israel, $25 million to Pakistan for, in that case, democracy and gender studies. I think it was 15 and 10 million split there on those two. 1.3 billion going to the Egyptian military, 453 million to Ukraine, and 700 million to Sudan. All of that equals 4.7 billion, or about $32.80 per taxpayer. Where it was also 1.4 billion in that for the Mexico wall. Again, $977 per taxpayer. One that was also very curious was Washington, D.C. local government for controlling protests and providing security. So $38 million is going to the local D.C. government for apparently handling some of the protests. Kennedy Performing Arts Center, $40 million. Appropriations Committee on the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and Receptions. That one is about $1.5 million, or about a penny per taxpayer. And then about $8 million toward supporting the Biden transition. There were also a few extra things that were thrown in there that weren't necessarily, or at least not directly financially related, including restrictions against China having a say in the next Dalai Lama. So some foreign affair type of plans there. Expanding laws against streaming for profit. So increasing the penalties for that. Creation of a climate security council, making it illegal to give racehorses painkillers before a race. Creating a commission to make consumers aware of storing and using flammable liquid containers near an open flame. Mandate measures to ensure diversity in hiring and for the intelligence community. So some D&I initiatives in the intelligence community, as well as giving government workers early access to the vaccines to keep government operating. So you can kind of see from that, there's quite a bit included in that. That's not a small amount. And this, again, is a summary of thousands of pages. And so obviously there is quite a bit more, but I wanted to at least include some of the big ones. Regarding the COVID relief bill, 166 billion is going out in the direct payment. So that's about the amount for those $600 checks that are going out. That ultimately ends up being about $1,158 per taxpayer. So that's the direct payment portion. So again, to reiterate, out of the $9,800 for the Omnibus and the $6,200 for the stimulus package, with a grand total of about $16,000 for this whole operation, we're talking about $1,158 actually coming back in those direct payments. In addition to that, the FDA was given an additional $55 million for some COVID efforts. The public health, which is the part about getting out vaccines, testing, tracing, and there's some different things too with substance abuse and childcare and some other additional things paid out there. But that was also a pretty large chunk of this at $73 billion. There was also for college and universities, secondary education or post-secondary education received quite a bit of finances in this bill of $82 billion for this education stabilization fund. I'm not entirely sure what all that includes, but again, that one is definitely important to note. There were some additional ones as well. A lot of these are separated out for things like the Bureau of Indian Education and tribal colleges at $819 million. A lot of it's basically the same thing, but it is listed out separately since it is part of a different system. Elementary and secondary school relief, $54 billion. That one is also considerable and probably where a lot of the educational resource actually needs to go. In addition to that, there's some that I'm not entirely sure what it is, like the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, $4.1 billion, sorry. Higher Education Relief Fund, and this one is one of those that I'm not sure if it's included in that $82 billion or not, but there's $22.7 billion for the Higher Education Relief Fund. In addition to that, Higher Education Stabilization Fund. And then there's some other ones separated out for Deaf University, Howard University, which is a historically black college. Some others that are included there, all in the tens of millions. And then for administrations, so student aid program, Office of Inspector General, some things like that, there's an additional $50 million going out to support administrations. FEMA is also getting $2 billion. FAA grants for airports are also getting $2 billion, with, again, air traffic industry just being way, way down. A lot of money is going out to prop that up. So another is the Department of Transportation, highways. A lot of this seems to be related to lost toll income and income that they normally would have received from the usage of roads as normal. But there's $10 billion going into that. For Amtrak, they're also getting $1 billion, just lost funds from coronavirus and lockdowns. Urban and Rural Transit Agency Assistance is receiving $14 billion. Extension of the CARES Act, this is the other really big one that's come up, is the additional $300 a week for unemployment. That one is expected to be around $180 billion or $1,256 per taxpayer. So that one's not small. I think it's really important to call out that that extension of the CARES Act is more than per taxpayer, is more than the direct payments that are going out to everybody. And so that one is not small. That one is quite considerable. And again, that could be a little bit more, a little bit less than that $180 billion, depending on who is in need at the time. But again, that one is, I think, pretty important to think about. There's also for total PPP, which is a lot of this is related to grants and things that are given to businesses in terms of loans and all the different ways that businesses are being held up right now. That one is $806 billion. Again, very, very, very large amount, especially when you compare that back to the direct payments that people are receiving. A lot of that is for things like payroll grants and loans. $284 billion is going into that. Another thing I'm not clear on is when we say something like that much money going into things such as payroll loans, I don't know if that's the anticipation of the loss that will go into servicing those loans, or if that is the total amount including those loans, as in will a lot of that money come back? I don't know. That was another thing I was not sure of. So if you know, be sure to include that in the comments because that would be helpful. Minority business development is receiving $25 million. Also, auditing and fraud mitigation is receiving some funds, probably to make sure that all this money is being handled appropriately, or at least as best as we can hold accountable for. Targeted EIDL advanced program, so that's aid for businesses that are hardest hit. That one is receiving $20 billion. Again, trying to help those industries that are being specifically hit by lockdowns. There's also a large microloan program, modification to loan programs, fee reductions, low interest rates, things like that. $1.9 billion is going into that. Debt relief for business loans, $3.5 billion. So again, we're assuming that debt relief is going to be necessary on a lot of business loans to keep things going. So that's where that money is going. Assistance for live venues such as museums and theaters. That one is quite large at $15 billion. So $15 billion. Not sure how they'll decide to divvy that up, but is going toward live venue events where people would normally be gathering and have not this year. Also, airline businesses, as well as their contractors, are receiving $16 billion. Again, trying to keep the airline businesses afloat during this time and during lockdowns. Buses and ferries will receive $2 billion. Renters Assistance Program, also a pretty significant one at $25 billion. There's also, with that renter assistance, a continued eviction moratorium through January 31st. I'm not sure what all the details are. I think there's a lot of evidence you have to provide to essentially show that that you need to stay there, but that one's also important to note. And that's a cost that a lot of people will actually pay for and face, a lot of homeowners, but not necessarily be a part of this government payout. There's also $9 billion in capital investments for minority communities, as well as financial assistance for businesses in low income and minority communities, $3 billion going there. There's an increased SNAP benefit of 15%, as well as a 2-year tax break for business meals. Those are a couple of things that I was unable to find any totals for. And so those are just listed out as you see them. Puerto Rico and American Samoa are also receiving $614 million for food assistance. And then not sure what supplement means, but there's $413 million going toward that, whatever it is. There was very little description around that. As much funding as necessary for child food programs that have been outlined. That one I think is primarily related to the schools and a lot of the child food programs that are being administered through there. There was no amount given, but basically there was just a blank check to say, take care of this. I'm not sure how much that will add up to, or if that was factored into those large estimates from the beginning. There's also for elderly nutrition programs, $175 million. For farming and agriculture, there's over $15 billion, nearly $15.5 billion. I'm not entirely sure what that's supporting. I don't know if there are specific sectors of the farming and agriculture industries that have been hit from lockdowns or from the shift in who is supplying food, especially if people have moved from restaurants to grocery stores and things like that. But whatever it is, there are $15 billion going into that, which is another pretty considerable one at about $108 per taxpayer. Dairy and farm stress, $488 million to support that. Forgiven loans to USPS. This is another big one. $10 billion will be forgiven in loans to the U.S. Postal Service. So that's about about $70 per taxpayer. Also, broadband internet access and usage at minority colleges and universities, about $285 million going into that. Telehealth program, about $250 million. Broadband discounts for tribal lands, as well as broadband connectivity for tribal lands, and broadband connectivity for rural areas. all of those are receiving quite a bit, 3.2 billion, 1 billion, 300 million, to make sure that as people are moving online, that essentially everywhere is caught up with that. But that does come with a pretty hefty price tag. And then finally, the FCC reimbursement program, not entirely sure what all that will include, but that was another 1.9 billion. So it seemed considerable enough to list on here. If you have any questions on any of these, feel free to look it up in the links that I provide. Again, I include these summaries for both of these, the Omnibus and the COVID relief, as well as the full nearly 5,600 page document. So if you're really curious about maybe some more of the details, or maybe you want to see if something makes a little bit more sense than the quick little summary text that I put on here, then feel free to look that up. I would definitely encourage people to do that. It's very good to be informed, very good to understand what's going on. And if you have any other questions or thoughts, please post them in the comments. I definitely think that there is some good debate that could occur around this, and just some good things for people to discuss and think about. Because again, this is very considerable. We're talking about spending $16,000 per taxpayer, with $6,200, almost $6,300 per taxpayer for the stimulus package. I think it's really important to know where that money is going, where it's coming from, who's going to pay for it in the long run. We are essentially taking out money a lot this year, so we are borrowing against the future and our children. And so I think that we need to consider that and look through here and just know where it's going. So thank you for joining us again. I hope you have a wonderful day.